Welcome to episode 12. This is the episode on plugins. Okay, where do you start when it comes to plugins? My gosh. Plugins are virtual devices. They are devices that you use to change the sound, add to the sound, create the sound. There's so many different kinds of plugins, it's crazy. The first and foremost thing you got to remember about plugins is that they are tools, and just because you have them, you don't have to use them. In the old days, before digital audio, in a control room, you would have a mixing console, and then you'd have what was called rack gear. And the rack gear would be compressors and equalizers and mic preamplifiers. And the console itself, it had equalizers and compressors and mic preamps on it. But just because the console had those elements didn't mean that somebody didn't make something cooler and you wanted it for its sound, and you would put it into a piece of rack gear. So all these devices that were in these racks and the console itself, well, that's what these plugins are emulating from those old control rooms. The next thing that you had beyond that were tape recorders, things to record sound. And they had a sound themselves. Different brands of tape recorders, they all had recording amplifiers and playback amplifiers in them that colored the sound. Then you had the tape that was on the tape recorder. The tape colored the sound. The speed of the tape colored the sound. The amount of bias you used colored the sound. There were so many things that you could sculpt the sound with. Then you had things that added to the sound. You had reverb units, plate reverbs, actual physical pieces of metal in big, large boxes that were 12 feet long and 6 feet high that had transducers inside the box to actuate the plate and to record the sound of the plate vibrating. Then you had chambers, actual rooms filled with tile with non-parallel walls that you had a speaker in one corner and a mic in another corner. And the speaker would make sound and the room would go it would all slap around. It was a very live room constructed for that very purpose. And the microphone would pick up the sound of the chamber. That's what chambers are. Then you had natural places that were designed for reverb, performance halls, theatrical halls, so that the room would aid in the performance coming off of the stage being heard and color it a little bit to make it sound better. All these rooms and all these devices that I'm talking about, plugins now emulate these things. Then you have plugins to modify sound, time modulation, like chorusing and phasing. Then you have the plugins that were created in the digital era that do things that no equipment did back in the old days. Pitch correction being one of them. To get the effect or to actually correct a problem. You have a good performance, it's a little flat or sharp in a spot or two, you go in there and you tweak it, you make it sound better. Then you have plugins that are designed to correct problems in recordings themselves. Working in television and movies, I can tell you that the production track, the dialogue editor would do a heck of a lot of work for me, getting rid of noise, getting rid of clicks and pops and snaps and all sorts of nasty sounding things going on that digital recording actually brought out, and making the production sound much better than it actually did even before I got my hands on it. And then I would get my hands on it and I'd start mixing the production tracks into a TV show or a movie and use a lot of plugins to make it sound even better. So yeah, plugins are an incredibly wonderful thing. The first type we're going to talk about are the plugins that emulate what recording consoles had going on and the gear that supported recording consoles. So in the episode talking about DAWs, I talked about how every DAW has a mixing console in it. This is Reason's mixing console, and this next door to that over here, this is an SSL 6000 console. This virtual console in Reason is modeled after this SSL console. Now, I used to mix on one of these back in the 80s. So this console here in Reason was like a welcome sight for me. I got a kick out of that. You notice at the bottom, you got your faders. You got your faders here, virtual faders. The next thing up here is sends, okay? And what's the next thing here? Sends. Pretty cool. Right above the faders in the virtual console are the panners. The panners are actually down here on the real console. And then the next thing up in our virtual console is equalization. And sure enough, Here we have equalization. And you see, even at the top, it has the high pass, low pass, high pass, and that's what this is right here, low pass, high pass. Up here, that right there in the real console is dynamics. And sure enough, what do you have next in the virtual console? Dynamics, right? Then at the very top of the real console, you had a trim at the top of the console, a line trim. And you see here, line trim. It just replicates this console. So in the virtual console, you've got all the accoutrements that you would have with a regular mixing console. All right, the first type of plugin we're going to talk about is EQ, equalization. Let's talk about this one right here. We've seen this plugin in the past. This is an EQ that comes with Studio One. Here's a little guitar part. Want to add some mids? Want to take out some mids? Want to add some high mid? You want to take out some high mid? It's just tone shaping. You go to the right, you have high frequencies. You go to the left, you have low frequency. That's one simple EQ right there. This EQ right here is a mastering EQ. It is modeled off of a very famous piece of gear, a Millennia NS EQ2. Only one side of it's lit up because we only have a mono track that it's inserted on right now. This EQ right here is a passive EQ. It's based off of a Pultec EQ. It deals with low end and high end, high frequencies and low frequencies. It doesn't really play around with mid-range. This is a famous EQ right here. This is an API. Real famous for nice, smooth high end and low end. About 300 and see. There you go. So that's another plugin that's modeled off of a very famous piece of gear. We saw the SSL console earlier. Here is a G-Series SSL console EQ. Very famous equalizer, very famous console. This right here is a McDSP EQ plugin. McDSP has very nice sounding stuff, very affordable stuff. Has a low pass, a high pass, 5 parametric points of equalization. Very nice. Okay, here's using this API 550A on a bass guitar part. Nice smooth low end. Put a little nose on that bass, a little 800 hertz. Take some of the high end out. There's flat. Just beefs it up, adds nice color to the bass. Very nice equalizer there. API. All right, here we are with an acoustic guitar part, and we got a nice Neve EQ plug-in right here. Let's take a listen to that guitar. All right, let's take out a little bit of that rumble. Put a little bit of high end on it. Now, add a little bit of body to it. Take a little bit of the honk out of it there. That's what it sounded like. That's what it sounds like now. Put it in a track. EQ helps shape the sound tonally of your elements in your songs. The next type of plugin we're going to look at is compressors. Here's a compressor that comes with Studio One right here. It's a very stock thing that comes with the software. We've got a little bass part here. So the idea of compression is to contain dynamic range. Now this bass guitar doesn't have a whole lot of dynamic range in it, but we can sit on it a little bit and we'll see the reaction of the compressor. Right here you see it. Okay, so just to give you an idea, turn the compressor off. Try it again with the compressor. Turn off the compressor. Try that part again. You notice that it's taking all the volume and just kind of squeezing it down a little bit. The dynamic range. This right here is a compressor that is modeled off of an 1176 LN limiting amplifier. I actually own one of these. These were invented in the 1970s, and on a bass guitar you can really squash a bass guitar in a nice way. Take out the compressor. Put in the compressor. See, it gets more growly. Put it in. It's squished a little bit, and also it's colored a little bit. It has a little bit of distortion in it that is pretty sounding distortion, because this is an amplifier. It's a leveling amplifier, you see right there. When you amplify something, it distorts the signal in some way, shape, fashion, or form with harmonic distortion. So that's a color. That's a good thing. This is a rack mount piece of gear. This thing is a tube compressor, and it has a ton of transformers in it. These things weigh about 60 pounds. Fairchild compressor. Used a lot on Beatles records, and used on a million records, actually. Here we have a multi-band compressor. You can grab different parts of the frequency spectrum and compress only those parts of the frequency spectrum. If you have something with a lot of brittle transients in it, well, you can just engage an area of mid-range kind of right here, and then you can go in there and take that threshold on that area and turn it down, and boom, turn down that threshold and squash that mid-range, and that's the only area you're compressing, is that area. This is a famous leveling amplifier, Teletronics, an LA2A. Great vocal leveling amplifier, very smooth. It's an optic compressor. It uses an optic cell, a T-cell is what they called it. This is another famous compressor. It's a DBX 160. It actually sounds good on bass guitars. Let's put it on a bass guitar and see what it does. Let's find one of their presets, see how it works, huh? There we go. How about a P bass? I think I used a P bass on this. Out, no compression. Put it in. There you go. Just squishes it a little bit and gives it a little bit of character. So that's compression on a bass guitar, and a few different types of compressors. Okay, here's a good example of some decent compression on an acoustic guitar. Here's that acoustic guitar part. I'm using this 1176. This is no compression. Here's some compression. You notice how it's taken the strum parts, sitting on those, and then after you strum, when the strings ring, that comes up in level. It's kind of fun. The chord rings better. See how that second chord, it dies out, then you pull this. That's compression, a good use of compression. Okay, that's the end of part 1 of Plugin Basics. In part 2, we'll cover the other different types of plugins that there are and give you plenty of examples of how to work them and what they sound like. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe and continue watching the Home Studio for Beginners course on Record, Mix, Repeat. I'm your host, Rusty Smith. Thank you for watching.